in the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers cast shadows long enough to hide the darkest secrets. A single glance can be a life sentence. For Selena Rossi, a 22-year-old art student drowning in debt, working a gala at the Plaza Hotel, was just a way to survive. She was invisible, a ghost pouring champagne for the city's elite. But she didn't know that in the darkest corner of the room, the city's most feared man was watching. He was a predator, a king in a bespoke suit, and she had just become his obsession. What happens when the most powerful man in the criminal underworld points at a nobody and changes her entire world with 6 simple words? The air in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was thick with the scent of money and gardenias. It clung to the damask curtains and swirled around the crystal chandeliers, a fragrance so potent it felt like it could be bottled and sold as eau de power. For Selena Rossi, it was suffocating. Juggling a tray of champagne flutes, her black uniform felt less like a professional requirement and more like a cloak of invisibility. She was a ghost here, a pair of hands to serve, a fleeting smile to offer, but otherwise unseen. Her world was a cramped studio in Queens, the smell of turpentine, and the constant, gnawing anxiety of student loans. This world of Armani suits and hushed, billion-dollar deals was a universe away. She navigated the glittering crowd, her artist's eye cataloguing details. The way a woman's diamond necklace caught the light, the predatory smile of a politician, the almost imperceptible tension in the shoulders of the men who stood silently by the exits, their jackets cut just a little too generously to hide what lay beneath. And then she saw him. He wasn't in the center of the room. He was in the shadows, an apex predator observing his hunting ground. He sat at a secluded table with 2 other men, but they were planets orbiting a sun of pure, gravitational force. His name, she'd heard it whispered in the kitchens with a mix of terror and reverence: Dante Moretti. The head of the Moretti crime family. He was younger than the legend suggested, perhaps in his early 30s, with hair as black as a starless night, and eyes that seemed to absorb all the light in the room. He moved with a stillness that was more menacing than any overt threat. When he lifted his glass of whiskey, the motion was economical, precise, deadly. Selena's heart hammered against her ribs. This man was a spectre from a world she only read about, a boogeyman the city pretended didn't exist. She tried to avoid his section of the room, her tray suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. But her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Gerald, gestured sharply in Dante's direction. "Table 7 needs a refresh. Look sharp." Taking a breath that did little to calm her, Selene approached the table. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the polished wood, the condensation on the glasses. She could feel his gaze on her, a physical weight that made the skin on her neck prickle. She refilled the water glasses of the other 2 men, her hands trembling so slightly she prayed no one would notice. As she reached for Dante Moretti's whiskey glass, his voice, a low baritone that rumbled like distant thunder, stopped her cold. "Leave it." She froze, her hand hovering in the air. Slowly she dared to lift her eyes. It was a mistake. His gaze wasn't just looking at her, it was dissecting her. It was intense, possessive, and shockingly familiar. There was a flicker of something in their depths, confusion, recognition, and a raw hunger that stole the air from her lungs. For a split second, the world fell away. There was only the deafening silence between them, the space between the prey and the predator. She quickly pulled back, murmuring, "My apologies, sir," and turned to leave, her legs feeling like lead. She didn't get 2 steps before she heard him speak again, not to her, but to the mountain of a man on his right. His voice was quiet, but it carried the chilling finality of a judge's gavel. "Marco, bring that girl to me." panic, cold and absolute, seized Selene. She didn't look back. She pushed through the crowd, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had to get out. She reached the service corridor, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was almost at the employee exit when two figures blocked her path. One was the man from the table, Marco. The other was a man she hadn't seen before. They didn't brandish weapons. They didn't need to. Their presence was a wall. "Mr. Moretti would like a word," Marco said, his voice deceptively calm. I have to work," Selene stammered, her mind racing for an escape that didn't exist. Marco's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your shift just ended." He didn't grab her. He simply gestured towards a private elevator she hadn't even known existed. The choice wasn't a choice at all. Trapped between the cold finality in their eyes and the certain, violent alternative of refusal, Selene Rossi, the invisible girl, walked into the gilded cage. The elevator door slid shut, sealing her off from the world she knew, and delivered her into the hands of the King of the Shadows. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence, a smooth, swift climb that felt like a journey to another realm. Selene stood rigid, her gaze fixed on the polished steel doors, reflecting a distorted version of her terrified face. Marco stood beside her, a silent, imposing statue. When the doors opened, they didn't reveal another hotel floor, but the private foyer of a penthouse that occupied the entire top of the building. The space was breathtaking and terrifying in its opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a panoramic, glittering vista of Manhattan. The furniture was modern and minimalist, black leather, chrome and dark wood, a stark contrast to the old-world grandeur of the ballroom below. It was a king's domain, built on a throne of glass and steel, high above the city he ruled. Dante Moretti was standing by the window, his back to them, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He hadn't changed out of his impeccably tailored suit. He looked out at the city lights as if he owned every single one. "Leave us," he commanded, without turning. Marco nodded once, and the heavy door to the foyer clicked shut, leaving Selene alone with the most dangerous man in New York. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken threat. She could hear her own frantic heartbeat. Finally he turned. Up close, his presence was even more overwhelming. A faint, almost invisible scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only mar on a face that was otherwise brutally handsome. His eyes, a deep, dark brown, pinned her in place. "Selene Rossi," he said. It wasn't a question. 22 years old, an art student at the Pratt Institute. Your mother is deceased. Your father, a dock worker named Frank Rossi, is drowning in medical debt after a workplace accident. You work 3 jobs to pay for his care and your tuition. You are, for all intents and purposes, completely and utterly alone. A cold dread washed over her. He had stripped her life down to a few pathetic, painful sentences in less than an hour. He knew everything. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He took a step closer, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the marble floor. "I want an arrangement." "An arrangement?" "You will stay here, with me," he stated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You will be given everything you could ever desire, a wardrobe, security, a life of comfort you cannot even imagine. All of your father's debts will be erased. He will receive the best medical care money can buy. Your tuition will be paid in full." Selene stared at him, dumbfounded. It was an insane proposition. "Why, you don't know me. Why would you do this?" Dante closed the remaining distance between them. He was so close now she could smell the faint scent of whiskey and a clean, masculine cologne. He reached out, and she flinched, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as his thumb brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. His gaze was intense, searching, as if he were looking for something in her face. "Let's just say you have something I want," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that shot through her. "Consider it a long-term contract. You will be my companion. You will be at my side when I require it. And in return, all your troubles will disappear." And if I say no? The words were brave, but they felt hollow in her own ears. A shadow passed over his face, and the gentleness vanished, replaced by the chilling coldness of a predator. "Saying no is not an option, Celine. I don't make requests. Your father's well-being, his very life, now depends on your compliance. The men who caused his accident. They can be very persuasive when asked to finish a job." The threat was clear, brutal, and undeniable. He held her father's life in his hands. He was offering her a golden cage, and the only alternative was a grave. Tears of rage and helplessness burned at the back of her eyes. She had been trapped from the moment he had seen her. "You're a monster," she breathed, the words laced with venom. He didn't even flinch. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "I am what I need to be. And you, little artist, are now mine." He stepped back, turning to pour himself another drink, as if the matter was settled. "Your room is the second door on the left. Clothes have been provided. We will have dinner at 9. She stood frozen, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. Her life, her dreams, her freedom, they had all been stolen in the space of a single evening. She was no longer Selena Rossi, the struggling art student. She was a possession, a beautiful object to be kept by Dante Moretti. As she walked on trembling legs toward the room he had indicated, she made a silent vow. He may have bought her life, he may own her body, but he would never, ever own her soul. She would find a way to escape this gilded cage, or she would die trying. The first week was a blur of disorienting luxury and suffocating dread. The room Dante had given her was larger than her entire Queen's apartment, with a private balcony overlooking Central Park and a walk-in closet filled with designer clothes in her exact size. It was a princess's chamber in a dragon's keep. She was a prisoner, albeit one draped in silk and cashmere. Dante was a constant, unnerving presence. He was surprisingly formal, almost distant. They ate meals together in silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound in the vast dining room. He would watch her, his dark eyes following her every move, but he never touched her. He never made a single advance. It was, in some ways, more terrifying than outright aggression. It was a waiting game, and she didn't know the rules. She was forbidden from leaving the penthouse alone. Marco or another stone-faced guard was her constant shadow if she ever stepped into the private elevator. Her phone had been taken, replaced with a new one containing only one number, Dante's. He had severed her from her old life as cleanly as a surgeon's scalpel. He did keep his word, however. A week after her arrival, she was shown a bank statement. Her father's debts were gone. A subsequent call, monitored by Marco, to the private hospital where her father had been moved, confirmed he was receiving care she could never have afforded. Dante Moretti had bought her compliance with the one thing she couldn't refuse: her father's health. Her only solace was art. She had demanded her supplies, the only request she had made. To her surprise, Dante had obliged. An entire room was cleared and converted into a studio, stocked with the finest canvases, paints and charcoals. It was there she could lose herself, pouring her fear, rage, and confusion onto the canvas. She painted the city from her balcony, a beautiful, glittering trap. She painted abstract explosions of color, channeling her inner turmoil. But she never painted him. She refused to capture the image of her captor. One rainy afternoon, driven by a desperate curiosity, she began to explore the penthouse more thoroughly. There was one door at the end of a long hallway that was always locked. It was the only part of the vast apartment she hadn't been allowed to see. Her gut told her that whatever answers she was looking for lay behind that door. That evening, after a particularly silent dinner, she found the courage to ask. "There's a room at the end of the West Wing. It's locked. What's in there?" Dante, who had been swirling the whiskey in his glass, went still. The air grew cold. "That room is not your concern. You said I could have anything I wanted in this apartment," she pushed, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I want to know what's in that room." He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She expected anger, a harsh refusal. Instead, a look of profound, aching sadness flickered in his eyes before being extinguished. He stood up. "Fine. You want to see? I will show you." He led her down the hallway and produced a key from his pocket. The lock clicked with a heavy, final sound. He pushed the door open and switched on the light. Selene gasped. The room was a shrine. It was a bedroom, beautifully preserved, but it was the walls that commanded attention. They were covered in paintings, portraits of a woman, and in every single one, Selene saw her own face staring back. The woman had her eyes, her dark hair, the same curve of her jaw, the same small mole just above her lip. It was her. But it wasn't. This woman's smile was brighter. Her eyes held a carefree light that Selene hadn't felt in years. She wore elegant gowns. She was pictured on a yacht, in a garden, laughing. "Who is she?" Selene whispered, her voice trembling as she walked towards a large, masterfully painted portrait that hung over the bed. "Her name was Liliana." Dante's voice was rough, strained. "She was my fiancée." Selene felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She looked from the painting to Dante, and suddenly, his obsession, his strange, watchful behavior, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The way he looked at her wasn't with desire for her, Selene Rossi. He was looking at a ghost. "She died," Dante continued, his voice hollow as he stared at the portrait. 5 years ago. She was murdered. A car bomb meant for me. The puzzle was complete. This wasn't about a random girl from a gala. It was never about her. She was a replacement, a stand-in for a dead woman. The realization was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. The gilded cage had just become a tomb, and she was being forced to haunt it. "I am not her," she said, the words a fierce, desperate plea for her own identity. Dante finally turned his gaze from the portrait to her, and the raw, undisguised pain in his eyes was terrifying. "No," he said softly, taking a step towards her. "You're not. But when I saw you in that ballroom, for 1 second, I thought God had given me a second chance." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the same gesture as their first night. But now it felt different. It felt like he was touching a memory, not a person. She wasn't his companion. She was his living, breathing portrait of a ghost. And in that moment, Selene knew her fight wasn't just for her freedom anymore. It was a fight for her very self. The revelation in Liliana's room changed everything. The dynamic between them shifted from captor and captive to something far more complex and unsettling. Selene felt a strange, unwilling pity for the cold-hearted monster who ruled the city's underworld. She saw the grief that was the source of his cruelty, a wound that had never healed. But pity was a dangerous emotion, and she fought against it, reminding herself that his pain didn't excuse his actions. She was a person, not a vessel for his memories. she began to push back in small, subtle ways. She started dressing in the clothes she preferred, simple jeans and sweaters, rather than the expensive dresses laid out for her. She filled her studio with her own chaotic, vibrant art, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the penthouse. She began speaking her mind during their silent meals, talking about art, philosophy, anything to fill the void and assert her presence as Selene, not the ghost of Liliana. To her surprise, Dante allowed it. Sometimes he would ignore her, lost in his own thoughts. Other times he would engage, his insights sharp and intelligent, revealing a mind that was far more cultivated than she had expected. During one such dinner, she was sketching idly on a napkin, a habit she couldn't break. He noticed. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "Nothing, just a face from memory." She lied. She had been trying to capture the likeness of Marco, his consigliere. There was something about his eyes she couldn't quite place, a watchfulness that seemed to go beyond mere loyalty. "Let me see," Dante said. It was a command. Reluctantly, she pushed the napkin across the table. He studied the charcoal sketch for a long moment. "You're good," he admitted. "You captured his ambition." The observation surprised her. "I thought he was just loyal." A dark look crossed Dante's face. "In my world, loyalty and ambition are two sides of the same coin. One can easily flip to become the other." It was the first crack in his armor, the first glimpse he had given her into the treacherous world he inhabited. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the man himself. Marco entered the dining room, his face grim. He leaned down and whispered something in Dante's ear. Selene couldn't hear the words, but she saw the change in Dante instantly. The quiet intellectual vanished, replaced by the cold, ruthless Mafia boss. His jaw tightened, and his eyes became hard as flint. "An attack," Dante said, his voice a low growl after Marco had retreated. "At the docks. One of my warehouses. The Falcone family is getting bold." He mentioned the name, Silvio Falcone, with a venom that made her shiver. The name of a rival family, one she'd heard whispered with fear. The abstract danger of his life suddenly became terrifyingly concrete. Later that night, Selene was woken by a scream. It was guttural, filled with anguish. Heart pounding, she crept out of her room and down the hall toward Dante's suite. The door was ajar. Peeking inside, she saw him thrashing in his massive bed, caught in the throes of a nightmare. "Liliana, no!" he cried out, his voice choked with despair. Without thinking, she pushed the door open and rushed to his side. "Dante, wake up!" She placed a hand on his shoulder. He jolted awake, his eyes wide with a wild, haunted look. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like steel, before he seemed to realize who she was. The wildness receded, replaced by a raw vulnerability she had never seen before. He was breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat. "It was just a dream," she said softly, her own fear momentarily forgotten. He let go of her wrist, the tension leaving his body in a shuddering wave. He didn't speak, just stared at her, his dark eyes filled with a storm of emotions she couldn't begin to decipher. In that moment, he wasn't Dante Moretti, the feared crime lord. He was just a man, haunted by his past, tormented by a love he couldn't save. She stayed until his breathing evened out, a silent, comforting presence in the dark. She knew she was crossing a dangerous line, allowing the walls between them to crumble. This man was a killer, a monster who had stolen her life. But as she watched him fall into a restless, dreamless sleep, she had to admit a terrifying truth to herself. The cracks in his armor were beginning to show, and against all reason, a part of her wanted to see the man underneath. The failed attack by the Falcone family sent a ripple of tension through the Moretti organization, and by extension, the penthouse. Dante became more withdrawn, more dangerous. Meetings with Marco and his capos became more frequent, their voices low and urgent behind the closed doors of his office. Selene felt like she was living on the edge of a volcano. Her relationship with Dante, however, continued its strange evolution. The night of his nightmare had shattered the formal distance between them. There was a new awareness, a raw current of electricity that arced in the space they shared. He began to seek her out, not just for meals, but in her studio. He would stand for long stretches, watching her paint, a silent, brooding figure amidst her colorful chaos. He never commented on her work, but his presence was a question she couldn't answer. One afternoon, he came in while she was working on a large, abstract piece, a swirl of angry reds and deep, despairing blues. "What is it meant to be?" he asked, his voice startling her. "It's about being trapped," she answered honestly, not looking at him. "It's about seeing a beautiful world through glass, but never being able to touch it." There was a long silence. "Do you still want to leave?" he asked, his voice quiet. Selene finally turned to face him. "I will always want to be free, Dante." "Freedom is an illusion," he countered, his gaze intense. "Everyone is in a cage of some kind, financial, emotional, societal. At least your cage is beautiful." "My cage has bars made of your choices, not mine," she shot back. "And it's haunted." The word hung in the air between them. "I am not Liliana," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I will not be her ghost. If I am to be here, you will see me. You will talk to me." A muscle feathered in his jaw. She had expected anger, but instead he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, Selene. You want to be seen? Then see." He gestured for her to follow him to his office. The room was dominated by a large mahogany desk. Spread across it were security photos and documents. "This is the aftermath of the Falcone attack," he said, his tone all business. "The official story is it was a rival move. But something feels wrong. It was too sloppy for Silvio Falcone. Too theatrical." He pointed to a grainy black and white photo of the warehouse entrance. The guards were taken out professionally, but the bomb placement was amateurish. It did a lot of damage but missed the primary shipment. It was a message, but the grammar is wrong. Selene leaned over the desk, her artist's eye, trained to see details others miss, scanning the images. She looked at photos of the guards, the wreckage, the chalk outlines on the ground. Most were useless blurs, but one photo, a wide-angle shot from a street camera down the block, caught her attention. "Wait," she said, picking it up. "Zoom in here." She pointed to a shadowy figure standing across the street, partially obscured by a newspaper stand, just moments before the explosion. The figure was clearly a lookout. Dante brought the image up on his large monitor, enhancing it. The face was still blurry, but the man's posture was visible, and on his right hand, a glint of metal. "It's a ring," Dante mused. "Nothing special." "No, look closer," Selene insisted, leaning toward the screen. "It's not just a ring, it's a signet ring. And look at his other hand, the way he's holding his phone. He's left-handed, but the ring is on his right pinky finger. That's unusual." Dante stared at the screen, then at her. A flicker of something, respect, surprise, lit his eyes. "Most men in my circle, if they wear a signet, wear it on their left hand. And look at the car parked behind him," she continued, her mind racing, connecting details. "It's a black Lincoln, just like the one Marco always drives. But the license plate is different. A decoy plate. Standard," Dante dismissed. "But the dent," she pressed, pointing. "Right there, on the rear passenger side bumper. It's small, but it's distinctive. I saw that same dent on Marco's car in the garage last week. I almost sketched it. The room went dead silent. The implication of her words was monstrous, unthinkable. Marco, his most trusted advisor, his friend since childhood, the man who was like a brother to him, a traitor. Dante's face became a mask of stone, but she could see the storm gathering in his eyes. He didn't question her. He didn't doubt her. Her artist's eye, her ability to see what others missed, had just lit a fuse. He looked at her, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at the ghost of Liliana. He was looking at Selene Rossi, his unlikely, unwilling, and incredibly perceptive partner. "Stay in your studio," he commanded, his voice deadly calm. "Do not leave for any reason." He strode out of the office, his purpose radiating from him like a wave of cold fury. Selene was left alone with the chilling photographs, her heart hammering. She had just proven her worth to Dante Moretti. She had also just signed a man's death warrant, and, in doing so, plunged herself deeper into the heart of his dark, violent world than she ever imagined possible. The penthouse transformed into a fortress under silent siege. Dante moved with a chilling, coiled intensity. He didn't confront Marco directly. Instead, he began to watch, to listen, using the information Selene had given him as a lens to re-examine years of loyalty. He was a master strategist, and Selene was his secret, unwitting weapon. She saw less of him, but she felt his presence everywhere, a low hum of impending violence. Marco, for his part, seemed oblivious. He was as deferential and efficient as ever, reporting on the investigation into the Falcone attack, an investigation he himself was leading, and clearly sabotaging. Watching their interactions was a masterclass in deception. Selene saw the subtle lies in Marco's eyes, the carefully constructed performance of loyalty, and she felt a cold knot of fear in her stomach. He was a snake, and Dante was letting him get closer, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The moment came sooner than anyone expected. One evening, Dante informed Selene they would be attending a dinner at a restaurant in Little Italy. "It's a meeting with the heads of the other families," he explained, his face grim. "A show of strength. You will be at my side." Selene felt a surge of panic. Leaving the safety of the penthouse felt like walking out of a bunker during an air raid. But she saw the resolve in Dante's eyes. This was part of his plan. Dressed in an elegant but understated navy blue dress Dante had chosen, she felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. As they descended in the private elevator, Dante suddenly stopped it between floors. He turned to her, his expression serious. "Selene, tonight you must trust me completely. No matter what happens, do not show fear. Understand?" She nodded, her throat too dry to speak. The restaurant, a classic red sauce joint named Rossini's, was old-world Italian. The owners cleared out the entire place for the meeting. The air was thick with the smell of garlic and tension. The other bosses were already there, stone-faced old men who had carved out their empires in blood. And at the head of a separate table, radiating smug confidence, was Silvio Falcone. Marco stood behind Dante's chair, ever the loyal consigliere. The dinner was a tense affair, full of veiled threats and false smiles. Selene sat silently, feeling 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her, assessing her role in the Moretti hierarchy. The explosion, when it happened, was deafening. It wasn't in the restaurant, but outside. The windows shattered inwards, spraying glass across the room. Screams erupted. In the ensuing chaos, Dante's men moved with practiced efficiency, forming a protective circle. But in that first, critical moment of confusion, Selene felt a hand grip her arm. It wasn't Dante, it was Marco. Come with me. It's not safe," he yelled over the din. She instinctively tried to pull away, to get to Dante, but Marco's grip was like iron. He dragged her through a back exit into a chaotic alleyway. "Dante sent me. The car is this way," he shouted. But she had seen Dante's face in the split second before Marco grabbed her. There was no panic, only cold, hard calculation. This was a trap, and she was the bait. Marco shoved her into the back of a black sedan, jumping in after her. But the car didn't head back towards the penthouse. It sped in the opposite direction, deeper into the industrial part of Brooklyn. "Where are you taking me?" Selena demanded, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "This isn't the way." Marco finally dropped the pretense. His face, in the flickering streetlights, was a twisted mask of resentment and triumph. Dante is a fool. He's been blinded by a ghost. For 5 years, he's mourned Liliana, letting the family stagnate. He puts a nobody who looks like her on a pedestal, while I've done the real work. You were working with Falcone," she breathed, the pieces falling into place. The warehouse attack. A little theatre to make Dante look weak, he sneered. And now, the grand finale. I deliver Dante Moretti's prized possession to his greatest enemy. Silvio will be grateful. The other families will see Dante as a weak leader who can't even protect his own woman. They will back me when I make my move. The car screeched to a halt in a desolate, abandoned shipyard. The air was salty and smelled of rust. In the distance, a single light illuminated a warehouse. Marco dragged her out of the car and towards it. Silvio Falcone was waiting inside, flanked by his men. "Well, well, Marco," Silvio said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "You delivered as promised." He looked Selene up and down, a lecherous smile on his face. The spitting image of Liliana. Dante always did have a weakness for that face. Selene stood her ground, her terror warring with a defiant rage. She was not a prize to be traded. "She's all yours, Silvio," Marco said. "Now, about our agreement." "Ah, yes." "Our agreement," Silvio said, his smile widening. He raised a hand, and from the shadows behind the crates, more men appeared. But they weren't aiming their guns at Selene. They were aiming them at Marco. Marco's face went white with shock. "Silvio! What is this? Did you really think I would partner with a rat?" Falcone chuckled, a horrible, dry sound. "A man who would betray his own boss, his own brother, for a taste of power? You are a tool, Marco, and your usefulness has just expired." Before Marco could react, a new voice cut through the tense air, amplified by the warehouse's acoustics. It was cold, clear, and utterly terrifying. "He's right, Marco. You always were a useful fool." Dante Moretti stepped out of the deepest shadows, flanked by his own soldiers. He wasn't panicked or enraged. He was calm. It was the calm of a hurricane's eye. He had known. He had planned for this. The restaurant explosion was a feint, a diversion to separate the traitor from the pack. "Dante," Marco stammered, his face a mess of disbelief and terror. "How?" Dante's gaze flickered to Selene, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "An artist's eye," he said simply, before turning his full, lethal attention back to Marco. "You betrayed my trust. You desecrated Liliana's memory by using her name, and you put your hands on what is mine." The final sentence was delivered with a softness that was more menacing than any shout. The showdown had begun. The rats were all in the same trap, and Dante Moretti had just slammed the door. The warehouse was a cathedral of rust and decay, the air thick with the metallic tang of the nearby sea and the palpable weight of imminent violence. It was a three-way standoff, a triangle of betrayal with Selene at its center. Dante's men and Falcone's thugs were a blur of dark suits and glinting steel in the periphery. But the true conflict was a vortex around the three men who had orchestrated this night. "You set me up!" Marco's voice, raw with the agony of a cornered animal, echoed in the cavernous space. He gestured wildly between Dante and Falcone. "You used her to lure me out. You were working together." Silvio Falcone let out a dry, contemptuous chuckle. "Do not flatter yourself, Marco. Betraying your Don is a disease. I was merely observing the symptoms." He turned his smug, reptilian gaze to Dante. "Brave words, Moretti, but your sentimentality has made you weak. You are outnumbered. This ends now. Give me the girl, a tribute for your foolishness, and I might let you walk out of here. This is a battle you cannot win." Dante remained unnervingly still, an island of calm in a sea of tension. A faint, chilling smile touched his lips, a sight more terrifying than any overt rage. "Who said I came here to battle? A battle implies an uncertain outcome." He let the words hang in the cold air, his eyes locking onto Silvio's. "This isn't a battle, Silvio. It's an execution." As the final word left his mouth, a cataclysmic series of events unfolded with terrifying precision. With a deafening, grinding screech of metal on metal, the warehouse's massive rolling doors at both ends of the building slammed shut, plunging the space into a disorienting, near-total darkness. A collective gasp, and the frantic clicking of safeties being disengaged, filled the sudden void. For a heartbeat, the only illumination was the single, grime-covered industrial bulb dangling from the ceiling, casting long, monstrous shadows. Then, the trap was fully sprung. From the high steel catwalks above, and from the deep shadows between stacks of shipping containers, figures emerged. They moved with the silent efficiency of ghosts, spectres of death that had been lying in wait. A swarm of tiny crimson lights bloomed in the darkness, dozens of laser sights painting a constellation of death upon the chests and foreheads of Falcone's men. They hadn't walked into a showdown. They had walked into a meticulously prepared slaughterhouse. The first shot was the spark that ignited the inferno. Muzzle flashes strobed through the darkness like violent lightning, illuminating frozen tableaus of shock and agony. The air exploded with the deafening roar of gunfire, the percussive blasts echoing off the metal walls, creating a hellish symphony. It was brutal, overwhelming, and ruthlessly one-sided. In the first wave of chaos, Celine felt a hand, slick with sweat, clamp around her upper arm like a vice. One of Falcone's remaining men, his eyes wide with animal panic, dragged her backwards, using her as a shield. The cold, unforgiving circle of a gun barrel pressed hard against her temple. "Drop your weapon, Moretti, or she dies!" the man screamed, his voice hoarse with terror. Through the strobing chaos, Selene's eyes found Dante's. He had already taken down 2 men, moving with a predator's lethal grace. But at the sight of her, the gun to her head, he froze. The cold, calculating Don vanished, and for a gut-wrenching second, she saw the man beneath. She saw raw, unadulterated fear in his eyes, not the fear of a leader losing control, but the primal terror of a man watching history repeat itself. It was the same helplessness, the same horror he must have felt 5 years ago, when the world had stolen Liliana from him. He was losing her all over again. That moment of vulnerability was the opening Marco had been waiting for. His face, a twisted mask of nihilistic rage, he lunged for a fallen pistol. He wouldn't survive. He knew that. But he could still inflict the deepest wound. He could destroy the one thing Dante still cared for. He raised the weapon, not at his former boss, but directly at Selene. Time seemed to warp and slow. Selene saw Marco's intent, saw Dante's momentary paralysis, and a surge of pure, defiant adrenaline coursed through her. She was not a prize. She was not a ghost. She would not die as a pawn in their wretched game. Her survival instinct, honed by a life of struggle, took over. She stomped her heel with all her might onto her captor's instep, eliciting a sharp grunt of pain. As his grip momentarily slackened, she drove her elbow backward with savage force into his ribs. It was a fraction of a second, a single desperate gasp for freedom, but it was all Dante needed. The Don was back. A single impossibly precise shot rang out, distinct from the cacophony, and the man holding her crumpled to the floor, a neat hole in his forehead. But Marco was already firing. Selena flinched, bracing for the impact. Instead, she saw Dante's body lurch violently to the side, positioning himself between her and Marco's aim. He grunted, a sharp exhalation of pain, as the bullet tore through the flesh of his shoulder, the impact spinning him slightly. A dark, crimson stain instantly blossomed on the pristine white of his shirt. He didn't fall. He didn't even falter. His jaw was set like granite, and his eyes, burning with a cold, righteous fury, locked onto his childhood friend. The warehouse fell into a sudden, ringing silence as the last of Falcone's men were neutralized. All that was left was the final, tragic confrontation. "Dante," Marco stammered, the gun trembling in his hand, the reality of his utter failure crashing down upon him. Dante took a steady step forward, his own weapon held firmly, his gaze unwavering. There was no anger left in his expression, only a profound, glacial finality. He was an executioner delivering a long overdue sentence. "You built your betrayal on a grave," Dante said, his voice a graveyard whisper that carried across the blood-soaked floor. "This is for Liliana." He fired once, the shot hitting Marco in the knee, sending him to the ground with a scream. Dante continued his slow, deliberate advance until he stood over the pathetic, writhing form of the man who was once his brother. He looked down at him, his eyes devoid of mercy. "And this is for Selena." He fired again. The second shot was final. The fight was over. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the distant siren's wail. Dante stood amidst the carnage, his left hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. The undisputed victor. His men began to secure the scene with quiet, brutal efficiency. He walked past the kneeling, broken form of Silvio Falcone as if he were a piece of furniture. He crouched down, bringing his face inches from the terrified old man's. "My father taught me that war is bad for business," Dante said, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "But betrayal is worse. It rots the foundation of everything. You allied yourself with a rat, and now you will pay the price. You will cede all your territory south of Canal Street. You will pay reparations for my losses tonight, and you will never, ever come after what is mine again. Am I clear?" Falcone, his arrogance shattered, could only manage a trembling nod. Dante rose without another glance at him. His duty done, the Don receded, and the man returned. He walked straight to Selene, his eyes seeing nothing and no one else. He reached her and gently cupped her face in his uninjured hand, his thumb stroking her cheek, wiping away tears she didn't realize she had shed. His gaze was a desperate, intense search for any sign of harm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice raw, strained. "You are," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the blood seeping through his fingers. "Dante, you're bleeding." "It's nothing," he dismissed, his entire focus on her. "Celine, are you all right?" She could only nod, her body racked with tremors from the adrenaline crash. He pulled her into his arms, his embrace fierce and protective. He held her tightly against his chest, burying his face in her hair. It was not the embrace of a captor holding a possession. It was the desperate, grounding embrace of a man who had stared into the abyss of his greatest fear for the second time, and had, by some miracle, emerged with his soul intact. The return to the penthouse was a silent, surreal journey through the awakening city. A private doctor, a stoic man with unquestioning eyes, stitched Dante's shoulder in the sterile silence of the master bathroom. Selena watched, her heart a painful, rhythmic pounding in her chest. When they were finally alone in the vast living room, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft gold. The city lights below were beginning to fade, giving way to a new day. The silence between them was no longer a void of tension, but a space filled with unspoken truths, waiting to be given voice. "He was right," Dante said finally, his back to her, as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling window. His voice was rough with exhaustion and pain. "Marco, I was blinded by a ghost, consumed by it. When I first saw you, all I could see was her. It felt like a cosmic joke. A second chance to protect the woman I failed, the woman I loved." He turned slowly to face her. In the soft morning light, she could see the profound weariness in his face, the vulnerability in his dark eyes. "But tonight, when that man had the gun to your head, I wasn't thinking about Liliana. I saw you. I saw your fire, the defiance in your eyes. I saw your courage when you fought back. I saw the woman who sees the details no one else does, the artist who sees the truth beneath the surface." His voice broke slightly. "And I was utterly, completely terrified of losing you." He crossed the room and gently took her hands in his. They were still cold. "I know this life was forced on you. I know that in many ways I am a monster. The world I live in will never be safe. I can't offer you a picket fence and a quiet life in the suburbs. My world will always have shadows, always have blood." He paused, his grip tightening on her hands, as if she were his only anchor. "But I can offer you my loyalty, my protection, my world. Everything I have, everything I am. I don't want to live in the past anymore, Selene. I don't want a ghost. I want a queen." Selene looked deep into his eyes, searching for and finding the devastating sincerity of his words. She thought of her old life, a life of quiet desperation, of being unseen. Then she thought of this life, of the gilded cage that had become a battlefield, and the terrifying, complicated man who had just risked his own life to shield hers. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something far more dangerous, real and intoxicating. She was no longer a victim. She had survived. She had a voice. She had power. Slowly, she raised a hand and gently, deliberately, touched the faint scar above his eye, a gesture that was now hers and hers alone. "A queen needs her own castle," she said softly, her voice steady and clear, a small, defiant smile playing on her lips. "Not a shrine to another woman. That room, Dante. It has to go." A slow, genuine smile spread across Dante's face. It was the first one she had ever truly seen, a smile that reached his eyes and washed away the shadows, if only for a moment. It transformed him. "Consider it done." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of possession or of frantic relief. It was a kiss of profound understanding, a sealing of a new and perilous bargain between equals. It tasted of gunpowder, whiskey, and the dawn of a new, uncertain future. She had been the girl who served drinks, the girl brought to him on a whim. But here, in the heart of the monster's kingdom, embraced by the king himself, Selene Rossi was no longer a prisoner. She was home, and she was finally ready to build her throne. And so Selene's life was irrevocably changed. She came into his world as a pawn, a ghost of a past love. But through fire and betrayal, she forged a new destiny. Her cage became a kingdom, and her captor a partner. Theirs is not a simple love story. It's a story of survival, of finding light in the deepest darkness, and of a power shared between two people from entirely different worlds. But is this a happily ever after, or just the beginning of a more dangerous chapter? Can a queen truly rule beside a king whose crown was forged in violence? What do you think will happen to Selene and Dante next? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by their story, please don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a dramatic tale, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.